Without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to Greg Buchanan and Michael Czap, and we'll take it from here.
And really feel passionately about this topic. And so I am Michael Czap, guy on the right. I'm an architect with the Beck Group in Dallas, Texas.
And I'm Greg Buchanan, a design manager with Holder Construction in Atlanta, Georgia, with over 30 years experience in design and construction.
This course is eligible for AIA continuing ed units, so you can get a learning unit for this. To do that, put your name and your AIA number in the chat. Greg, you're up.
Oh. Today, we're going to focus on 4 learning objectives. The first is a brief understanding of the 3 primary project management methodologies and their application to design management. Second, we'll touch on who the end user is for each design phase, such that we may craft deliverables that are of value to the end user.
And for the third, we're going to address some ways that architects waste their time and how we complicate the pre-construction and bidding effort that's downstream. How do we reduce that? And lastly, if decision-making is what allows projects to move forward, how do we get better at doing that?
All right, let's jump right in to give you a little background of the 3 primary process management methodologies.
So process management systems they provide a lens for viewing how we do work and can foster a methodology that drives continuous improvement. In 1990, there was a book titled The Machine That Changed the World. It detailed the principles of lean production and how the Toyota Motor Corporation had created a best-in-class manufacturing system. The book started a revolution in the United States and Europe and really across the world that continues to this day. And what they described in that book, they gave the name lean to what Toyota was doing. And lean is all about the removal of waste. And that is done by through a 5-step process to identify value and really optimize that. And adopting the value definition for the AE industry, it's really anything our client is willing to pay for. It's effort that progresses the project, our client cares about it, and it is work done correctly the first time. And there's a focus on making things flow.
The second is Six Sigma, which was developed in the 1980s by Motorola, with the main driver of removing variation. This was developed around a 5-step process with the goal of focusing on problems and correcting those problems.
And lastly, the theory of constraints, or TOC. Now, TOC gets a lot less press, but is nonetheless considered right alongside Lean and Six Sigma. It is also a 5-step process that looks to identify and manage constraints or hindrances to the flow of work. For the sake of this webinar, we're going to lump all 3 of these approaches together under the name Lean. So when we're speaking Lean, we're actually thinking of all of these. It's worth noting that each offers slight distinctions when compared to the other, but they're helpful for when we look at how we work and when we develop new processes. So one company that incorporated lean thinking or lean type approaches was Southwest Airlines, not a manufacturing business, but an airline. And in an interview with Slate magazine several years ago, they recounted how they had come to realize at the corporate level that, in their words, we only make money off of our planes when they're in the air. Now, they still had marketing, HR, they had IT systems they had to maintain, an accounting department, they had a union. There were many aspects of the business to manage and keep going. Nonetheless, what they said was that this premise became foundational to the entire organization and brought a focus on how they ran the business. So this brings up an interesting question for design professionals. How do our firms make money? And so if you have some thoughts, drop them in the chat. We're going to circle back and address this in a few minutes.
Hey, Mike, we're not seeing your screen.
Yeah. Give me just a moment. Yeah. I'm using Teams through a browser, which was the only option it gave me. So let's go. Is it back up?
Yes.
Okay. So Greg, while I'm talking or whatever, you might pull it up on yours in case we need to switch presenters quickly. So let's go back one slide. There you go.
We got you now. Go back one more. Oh, no, you're good. Okay. All right. Back on track here. Looking at the Southwest example and how they adapted a lean methodology to airplanes and operations, we can now flip to how lean applies to construction and some challenges to overcome. Construction is very well suited to process-driven solutions due to the majority of tasks and issues being logistical in nature. I think we can all agree that much of the work in construction is linear. For example, the procurement process has the following steps: advertisement for bids, pre-bid meetings, clarifications or pre-bid RFIs, addenda, opening of bids, negotiating contracts, and awarding contracts. I'm sure I missed something there, but that's the basics of what happens in procurement. All of the steps follow in order and are on a specific timeline that can be measured and tracked. All things that have a specific outcome. If we look at the subjective aspects of construction, you might think of the more difficult issue of managing the people who are doing the work. In other words, dealing with people is much different than dealing with tasks.
Now, if we take and look at what the challenge is for design, it's really quite different. While aspects of our work are logic-based or logistical, the primary challenges of a design firm are subjective. And so it's really a client-driven process. And our goal is to envision and develop a building that really has never quite existed in the form that we're going to create. And it's really, we're weaving parts into a whole and solving many problems. Design needs time to develop, and we have to protect that time to let the churn and the back and forth happen. So lean must be applied differently if it's going to be effective for designers, and we will touch on that.
So now that we have a better understanding of the underlying ideas of lean and the basic challenges the design and construction industry face, let's now take a closer look at knowing who the audience is that we are producing for. It is with the end user in mind that we should be crafting the deliverables. And in this section, we'll show you some examples of how to be strategic when addressing the needs of the audience.
Yeah, so thinking back to Southwest Airlines, let's establish a premise that can be foundational for a design firm. And so here it is. It's the progression of projects. Projects moving through a firm is the mechanism that allow us to bill for services rendered. It's how we make money. So it's really in every firm's interest to become very good at moving projects forward. And the progression begins with really defining the scope of work for a project, solving the puzzle, developing a program, conceptual design efforts, ultimately life safety strategies, selecting building systems, and then integrating them together, all of which then is documented through a BIM that really is expressed still primarily through 2D documents. So for most firms, you know, this is not the only thing, but from a business point of view, it's the main thing.
Complementary to the 3 tasks slide that Mike just showed, what we want to share now is the notion that the focus of the deliverables shifts as the project moves forward through each phase. And along with that, the end user or primary audience shifts as well. It's not typical to think of our deliverables as having an audience, but doing so brings clarity in what and how you can craft your documents. As you can see in the SD phase, the goal is to define the overall scope of the project, identify primary building systems, and start to solve major life safety aspects such as egress capacity and type of construction. We really have two audiences here. We have to address the client's project needs and provide information to the contractor, who will begin to provide feedback on the overall budget status. The DD phase has the same audience, but the deliverables become more refined such that we are integrating building systems to work together, validating overall scope, and finalizing the life safety approach. In CDs, for the issue for permit stage, the audience is primarily the AHJ. Here we need to prove that our design solution is code compliant to receive a building permit. And finally, at the issue for construction stage, the focus turns towards the contractor as the end user. The goal here is to provide coordinated documents sufficient enough to procure all the trades without scope gaps, and then start the process of construction. For design managers, you need to ensure that the team is focused on providing deliverables that actually solve the issues that are fundamental to the phase and also satisfies what is required contractually.
So here's an example of a conceptual design package from a $300 million hospital up in the northeastern United States. And at this point, the audience was administrators, medical professionals, a program manager, and a construction management team. The architecture team asked themselves, how can we better communicate, complex design ideas and an enormous amount of information to this client? And they determined really that they were subject matter experts. And frankly, we knew how to design a hospital. We knew what goes in every room and every space and why. And so we should be able to convey a detailed project scope at concepts very early in the project, and frankly develop a pretty high level of building systems quality. So we're not going to demonstrate just the quantitative aspects. We're going to actually include a lot of qualitative ones. This was pretty successful, along with a pretty large 11 by 17 PDF booklet that was also printed for the client. We had traditional drawings that went along with that, so the construction manager had the benefit of both. But the takeaways were that the majority of the visual content in the booklet were taken from early design meetings during a master planning phase, and then really through concept design. So we didn't have to create a whole lot of extra content. We just annotated what we had. The project management firm was really surprised by the approach, and they just said, we're typically used to seeing quantitative information at this point, but you have provided qualitative. This had a benefit then for the construction manager, and what we found then as the project moved forward through schematics and design development was that the ultimate GMP deviated very little from what we had outlined in concepts. And so good visual communication practices like this reduce the need for users, administrators, contractors, whoever's looking at this. It reduces the need for them to go to multiple sheets and look at different drawings in order to piece together the whole of the project story. In essence, this is really trying to be client friendly. So this is a project in schematic design. It's from a package that was produced, and the audience here was the client and a cost estimating firm that was hired, no contractor on board at this point. The project was also an experiment within the firm. It was a full service design firm with all disciplines, architecture, structural, civil, mechanical, electrical, plumbing in-house. However, for this job, the decision was made that only architecture was allowed to work in Revit. So this was quite different because it was a full service firm, and most of the disciplines were obviously in Revit with the exception of civil. So the engineers used PDF backgrounds and added their design information using Bluebeam markup. So what was interesting about it was just the MEP engineers, that's the drawing on the left, they created this deliverable the morning of the submission, and they had spent a little bit of time before this kind of outlining the types of systems that they would use primarily for HVAC. But frankly, not a whole lot of time was invested in it, and it was just sitting down and executing it. So the approach was very well received by a client, as they could easily look at the documents and understand what they were seeing. And ultimately, the project ended up adding a second level. There was an ad service for the increased scope, and also to redo a portion of the schematic design phase. So some takeaways on this was this allowed the architect to move and groove, or to morph and mold the plans without causing engineers rework, something we quite often see. So we were going to hold the engineers back temporarily, let the architect, again, have some flexibility to move things around. The senior engineer in the job observed that his team really ended up focusing on the design and the equipment selection instead of the intricacies of the software. And he said, in fact, that the conversations completely shifted to, instead of fighting with different issues and how do I show this or that, to what are we actually designing, and what's the appropriate thing. This was all very easy to create, and within the firm, the profit was quite high. So it was a good effort, a good experiment.
Now, the last two examples Mike showed were ways to streamline and communicate information efficiently. But we all know that there are complications to achieving the desired results. Many common inefficient practices are rampant in deliverables. Some of them are easily remedied, and some take more effort to achieve. It is also important to understand the effects that these may have during pre-construction and bidding phases.
So a top 10 design firm in the United States found that after they had transitioned from AutoCAD to Revit, that their document sets just swelled in size. And it initially revealed itself just because project metrics were going south, and their project profitability nosedived. So they appointed a committee of architects to look at that and compare work they had done previously in AutoCAD, and that produced in Revit to see, what is the difference. And what they found was that it was just very easy to add sheets and views and drawings, and the staff just really wasn't thinking about it. They just, again, populated drawings onto sheets. And so the solution then that they found and put in place was to have senior individuals intersect with project teams early on, really at this point during design development, to cartoon or do tee-up sets and really plan out the work. And from the project that we have up here, and from the look at that, 156 sheets, we were able to get a 49% reduction, and that equated to about 1 FTE that could actually be taken off of the job. Again, just by spending a little bit of time and looking at what the teams were doing. Architects like to model and draw. We also appreciate visual complexity. And many of us believe that if drawings are dense with information, that is the sign of a good set of documents. This slide is from a post-mortem for a project, really an analysis after project completion to examine what we produced and how to improve our processes. I like to call it shredding a set. So we're going to track 3 pieces of information that you see in the green box at the bottom right. This information appears dozens of times across the set. So what was initially identified on a wall section, R13 rigid insulation, 3 5/8 inch metal framing, and 5/8 inch gypsum board, that information then was repeated onto the second level. Looking at the floor plan, I found that there actually was an interior partition tag for furring against the concrete tilt wall. So the E2 partition actually defined each of these elements, and the floor plan sufficiently tagged all of these. Looking through the set, I found over 70 different drawings where these 3 pieces of information appeared, in some cases multiple times, so dozens and dozens of times throughout the set. And the question really that we asked the team was, if the set is modeled well, can we reduce the annotation? Or can there be other referencing approaches used, such as in this case here, just partition as scheduled? could their time or could your time be better spent doing something else than just, again, adding annotation? So this is an example, again, where a lot of time was spent creating or inputting redundant information into documents. And in the lean parlance, we would call that overprocessing.
Yeah, and it's not only the over-documenting that complicates deliverables, it's the oftentimes unclear communication to the contractor that may cause confusion or lead to unpurchased scopes of work. This word salad, if you will, of commonly used terms may or may not be used correctly. So if you do use these terms, make sure you know what they mean. The most obvious one here is the term by others. In our opinion, this should never be used. Who are the others? Of course, we may never know. It's better to say under separate contract if that is the intent. Using by others leaves it up to interpretation.
And when you don't know, yeah, quite often, in the spirit of redundant information, we also have occurrences where designers like to take shortcuts and make assumptions that all too often prove to be inaccurate. And in essence, again, in these cases, we're sometimes complicating the work processes for contractors downstream from us. I've reviewed project documents where the architect pointed to a drawing element on their drawings and had the note to see structural. And then looking over at the corresponding structural detail that related, I would find a note that said, refer to architecture. And so again, kind of humorous, but crazy.
Another common complication that occurs is the use of different terminology for the same item. In this case, let's say we want to call out gypsum board, which is the industry-wide standard terminology, and what is referenced in master spec as 092900. But how many times do we see different names applied to this product, and often within the same set of documents? Here are 6 other names of gypsum board commonly seen. Do you think that being consistent in the naming would be more beneficial to everyone? Of course. A solution to removing the variations we just saw can be achieved with keynotes, especially within the BIM universe. This subject is oftentimes controversial among design professionals, but if the system is developed with the end goal in mind, it can be highly effective. Of course, how keynotes are applied by firms varies, as there are several different ways of doing them within BIM software. With this example, it shows an approach that uses keynotes by specification section on the detail, and also includes a legend with the description on the sheet. What's great is that in the BIM software, the materials or components may be tagged with the keynote embedded within, so it's very easy to stay consistent. Have you ever wondered how contractors use the notes on your drawings? It may surprise you to realize that they are often used to assign scopes of work to different trades. Experienced pre-construction staff search for terms in the drawings and work with subs to ensure that the scope is covered. One way they do this is by PDF review and assigning different colors to individual trades. You'll notice in this example that there are 6 trades identified in this single detail. It's up to the contractor to assign a trade to a scope of work, so remember that you should leave the means and methods to the contractor.
So we've talked about several situations where we look at deliverables that architects produce that have waste in them, wasted effort, over-processing, redundant information. So how do you reduce that in the models you create and the documents that we get from them? And we really term this as needless redundancy. Well, what we can do is we can create office and firm-wide approaches for how to document more simply, along with educational material that is succinct. And so in this, in the graphics here, we have really 4 systems that are fairly common in firms. Top left is a partition typing system that is, again, part of the BIM template and is obviously integrated with the actual model elements. On the top right, a millwork system that it can be similarly done. Bottom left is a plumbing fixtures type schedule where we schedule not only the plumbing fixtures accessories that are used, the toilet accessories, but we also can schedule in this case, handicap accessibility requirements. And then the bottom right is just a couple of different examples of a door typing system. Again, all this is integrated into the BIM and can be used across an office, across the firm to streamline how we produce the work. And for the case of the millwork or the cabinetry, here's really, it's 9 pages, but really there's 8 pages of content that explain how to use the template that's built into Revit. Who's it going to be used for? How do they read it? What's the process of taking and bidding? The development of shop drawings? What information do you need to show, et cetera? And so this is meant to be educational to the intern or the new person that's in the firm, with an explanation then of some simple approaches to, again, graphically reduce the clutter in our documents. And so not only is the BIM template item intended to be short and sweet and to the point, but also the educational material. Our goal then really is just to integrate lean methodologies into our templates that are easy to learn and easy for people to use. Approaches that reduce graphic density and allow us to do rapid documenting. Now, we realize that old habits are hard to die, and many firms lack the will to foster improvement. There are just other priorities that get in the way sometimes. So for those firms, Greg and I are offering the following coupon. It can be included in your project proposals and other business development documents, and it shares your firm's dedication and commitment to going above and beyond, even when it's not needed or it doesn't make financial sense. So if you're interested in a copy of this, please reach out to Greg and I after. We'll give you our contact information and we'll send you a copy for your use.
The final topic we'd like to cover in Lean for Design Management is decisions. We have some suggestions on how to make them and how to make them stick. If you remember from the first slide of the presentation, Lean process management focuses on flow, and decisions are a significant part of what makes a project flow, either during design or during construction. Being timely and documenting them will ensure that there's a better chance of meeting deadlines and staying on budget.
So we said earlier, or as Greg just mentioned now, really decisions are what drive projects forward. So how do we bring a clear focus to our work effort and progress the project in an efficient manner? The phase roadmap is one tool that identifies what needs to happen for each phase, and it builds in coordination efforts between disciplines. It can be adapted to fit really any type of project. A goal of this is to eliminate potential project roadblocks, as it is always more productive to prevent problems from developing versus expending effort later to detect and correct. So you may have noticed that in your firm, there's never enough time to do the work well, or quite often there are hindrances that pop up to prevent us from doing our work well, but somehow or another we always find the time to come back and fix problems later.
Another useful exercise is to identify key components early in a project. The effort to do this may seem premature if the project is an early schematic design, but it has been our experience that the earlier decisions are made that can be relied on, the less likelihood that wasteful revisions must be made later, causing setbacks. A strategy to accomplish this is to hold what we call a building systems review. Think of this as a modified design charrette for the technical portions of the project. The purpose is to set the basis of design of systems early in the project such that the design team, client, and contractor or CMAR have direction and can move the project forward. This charrette can be scaled based on project size and be completed over the course of a few hours on a smaller project or several days for a larger or more complex project.
Yeah, I first used this system on a project around 1999. We had a joint venture architect. They're the ones who introduced it. And together we were working with 2 clients and a contractor to design and build an 11-story hospital down in Houston. And this was a 2-day effort at that point, and I was blown away by how effective this was to do this during schematic design. And what I found was that quite often in prior practice, decisions or questions we would ask the owner, and the development of the project, many things that were addressed in contract document phase, we pushed way back into schematic design. And when the construction documents came out about 11 or 12 months after this building systems review, it was interesting that the final specs deviated very little from what was pulled out in this meeting. So football games have 22 men on the field at one time, and they line up, and when they see the ball move, they all start to run in different directions. Now, what keeps this from being an exhibition of madness? Well, each team has prepared plays that they have rehearsed together, and to the untrained eye, it may look like chaos, but there's actually an orchestration of movement on the field with a corresponding response of movement or to that movement from the other team. So many design firms, like contractors, employ pull planning, which is what this is an example of here, where we as designers, and for a phase, SD, DDs, or CDs, we sit down together, or over using a software like this online, we attempt to choreograph the flow of information and to orchestrate all of the handoffs between disciplines. And in essence, we're trying to bring order to what could be chaos otherwise. And we have found at Beck and many other firms have found this to be a very effective tool to put some boundaries and guardrails around the project and to help us to move things forward.
All right, we looked at a couple different tools earlier on how to facilitate decision making, but those focus on larger items like building systems and what not to forget. But what about other decisions that need to be made throughout the life of the project? How do these get addressed and solved such that it's not overwhelming? One tool that we've used is to create a decision log that priorities can be assigned and outcomes can be documented and shared. Another way is to have focused meetings on a certain portion of a building, or let's say a method of construction, with all members of the design, owner, and construction team, much like the building systems review did. But this will be concentrated on a specific outcome. Recurring meetings are useful to pull the information from attendees and get solutions more collaboratively rather than not being inclusive at all. It's important to realize that these are just tools. It may not work for all situations, so make your own and use the tools that work for you.
So we're at the end here, and we're gonna end up, since we've talked about football a couple of different times. Football is a complex game of plays and strategy, and there's a lot of rules. In fact, we have listed every single penalty that can be called in a game right here. And so again, football is a complex game. It is also simple in that it's really two teams that are trying to move a ball one direction to get over a goal line, while the other team tries to stop that effort, and they take turns doing this. And so whoever has the most points after 60 minutes wins the contest. What we want to say to you today is really that design delivery is a complex endeavor, but it is also very simple in that our goal is to just move a project forward. So get better at developing plays and strategies within your firm for advancing your projects. So yeah, thank you for your time today, and this concludes the presentation.
Michael and Greg, thank you very much for the great presentation. It was enlightening for me. I hope everybody else felt the same. We need to rethink that more is better. That's the one thing that I'm taking away from this here, and the right solution is the best solution. Are there any questions in the chat window by any chance? Anybody else has any questions? Thank you very much, and I hope to see you at the next BIM Forum webinar, October 26th and November 8th. Thank you very much.